Society's definition of courage fluctuates like the waves of the sea and depends on social trends, previous acts of courage, and press coverage. Outlining what it truly means to be courageous can be a little bit more complicated than just receiving a heart from a wizard to overcome cowardice. One can consider an act courageous when one leaves their comfort zone with pure intentions and after conquering fear. Courage, generally associated with positive acts that are beneficial to the person acting or to others, cannot be illegal, excessively risky, or unintentionally unsafe. For an act to be courageous, it must fit the following criteria. For an act to be courageous, it must fall outside of the person's quotidian realm of responsibilities and obligations. For an act to be courageous, it must not involve excessive risk, such as death or extreme personal injury. For an act to be courageous, it must be non-violent and avoid harm to others and their property whenever possible. For an act to be courageous, it must weigh the risks of the situation and be the safest option available. For an act to be courageous, it must have pure motives unclouded by greed, revenge, or malice. For an act to be courageous, it must involve the overcoming of fear in a single completed act. These criteria can be applied to many literary characters in order to determine whether their acts are sufficiently courageous. For example, Jean Valjean's act of stealing a loaf of bread to keep his family from starving in Les Miserables by Victor Hugo seems courageous at face value. The act falls outside of his normal extent of responsibilities. Although his family requires his help to survive, he never had to steal before in order to keep them from starving. He also completed the full act of stealing the loaf of bread and certainly felt distress at the idea of being caught and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. This risk of imprisonment or even death is excessive because the narration reveals that, quote, the loaf of bread would probably not have been refused to him had he asked for it, close quote. Clearly, that would have been the safer option and saved Valjean a stretch of painful servitude as a prisoner. This also reveals that Jean Valjean may have had other motives in stealing the loaf of bread. He allowed a bitter life to make him a bitter man. Valjean decided society owed him the loaf because, quote, men had only touched him to bruise him, close quote. He let his hate fester into suffering and let that suffering grow into a single act of hate that led to more suffering in his life. Eventually, his choices serve as a springboard to him becoming the very definition of an honest and courageous man that helps many people through his actions, but the act of thievery does not fit all the criteria of courage. Although stealing a loaf of bread involved overcoming fear and extended his responsibilities, Jean Valjean did not act courageously because stealing the loaf of bread happened out of spite, excessive risks, and unnecessary danger. Thanks.